Hi there. Thanks so much for listening to the fourth episode of the COVID School Miniseries brought to you by the Renaissance podcast with Margaret Allen and James Willets. In this episode, entitled The Headteachers, Margaret and I will be chatting to two head teachers and how their respective institutions have dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of remote learning from the 1920 academic year going into the 2021 academic year, with a specific focus on the curriculum and assessment in this episode. So please do enjoy and leave a comment on SoundCloud or on your own social media account. Please do share the episode on Facebook or Twitter. So please enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Renaissance podcast with Margaret Allen and myself, James Willets. We're here today with Nick and Navroop, both head teachers, both SLT in their respective schools. If you want to introduce yourself, we'll start with you, Navroop.
Okay, I'm Navroop Mehat. I'm head teacher in a large primary school in Slough, Wexham Court Primary School. Love the school, love the children, love the families. We have a lot of things going on in the school, really keen to make it the best experience for our children and families. Personally, really into traveling and finding out about new cultures, new places. So currently this lockdown scenario for me is quite difficult, like it is for everybody, but can't wait to broaden my horizons very shortly and go to lots of different places and find out what's going on in the world, educationally and other.
Thank you, James. Morning, Margaret. Morning, James. Thanks for having us. I'm Nick. I'm the head teacher at Courthouse Junior School in Maidenhead. And just listening to Navroop there, I lead a far less interesting life than you do. So I'm feeling a bit jealous of all that travelling.
Thank you both. That's lovely that you're here. We're all obviously sitting in different parts of the country or different rooms, and COVID, what an impact. And we won't start going through the unprecedented and unreal, and we didn't know it was coming and all of that. But one of the things that might be good to kick off with is curriculum planning, actually, and how different it must be from what you normally do in this term or what you normally did last time. And just Nick, how different has it meant that teachers are obviously going to teach the curriculum? How do you go about influencing that, or what have you been doing in order to accommodate everything as well as deliver a curriculum that's suitable and relevant?
I think the first thing to say is that if the school's curriculum is well designed and well sequenced in the first place, then it does support schools to deal with difficult situations like this at the moment. And I suppose the challenge that teachers are facing right now is to continue with the sequences that we planned to make sure that children are getting a good experience, but also to acknowledge the difficulties that remote learning brings and to break things down into much smaller chunks to enable them to understand and to practice different bits in what is a difficult time working at home for most children.
And Navroop, how has that been received? How have you been able to manage that? Because you obviously want to give autonomy to your teachers, but you also need to make sure that what's being offered is what you would like. As you said earlier, you want your school to be the best, so your vision.
Yeah, I mean, our school's in quite a unique position where I'm sure other schools have done the same, but during lockdown, the initial lockdown, we took it more as an opportunity to rewrite our entire curriculum approach. And because we had the time to do it, and that's probably the biggest issue in schools, that I'm sure all leaders want to provide really good CPD and make sure that their curriculum is sequenced and planned well, but that alongside the teaching role and everything else that comes with it is really difficult. And we've got a recruitment issue going on in the educational sector, so it makes it more difficult. So we decided quite early on that we would be quite prescriptive about our planning, because it had to be about the children and not solely about the teachers. And so we needed something that was consistent and good. And we'd started on that journey, but the lockdown enabled us to really plan out a curriculum that we were happy with. And that started, and it has to start with the CPD of teachers. And Nick's right. If you've got people that understand the curriculum and then can plan a well-sequenced curriculum, you in these times can adapt it. I think teachers are worried about what they can and cannot change, shift and move, but there's a lot of stuff out there that can help you do it. I mean, we've been looking at the Education Endowment Fund, their planning resources for COVID. They're really good and they simplify the curriculum. And if anything, right now teachers are more in tune with their pupils because they have to listen to them as opposed to stand in front of them and teach than I think they've ever been. And so if you can get your curriculum well mapped out and the teachers have got good subject knowledge, then they have got that autonomy to change it and shift it. Where they don't is where it becomes a little bit spiky and then you have to intervene and say, no, this is what we're doing. And they haven't fully bought into it.
Thank you. In terms of the national curriculum, so of course, you know, maths and reading are core always. But during this time, Nick, what do you think has happened maybe to those additional subjects that, you know, are important, but probably more challenging to deliver remotely or to encourage parents to engage with? Is that something that's come up?
Yeah, I think, first of all, is when I took over a courthouse, there was a very much a focus on the core subjects, and because of accountability, there's SATs and everything else that are geared around English and maths. Sometimes those core subjects can taken a back seat, but actually it's those non-core subjects that help to build children's understanding of the world, to build their general knowledge, which actually it is much better for their reading comprehension than loads and loads and loads of reading answer questions. So schools rightly should prioritize those non-core subjects, because a diet of just English and maths can become fairly stale at some point and not real. So the way that we're continuing with that is, again, relying on the fact that, as Navroop has said in that previous lockdown, to really review curriculum units of work, to make sure that we're really clear on what it is that children should learn, it sequenced towards an end point. And we can continue with that in this lockdown because of the careful thought that's gone into those units of work. I think that it's definitely should remain a priority, even though we've got this restricted attendance at the moment.
And interesting, just on that idea of core subjects and understanding why those core subjects are core subjects. It's not because English reading and maths are subjects that we prioritize because we like them. They are essential to enable all other learning to take place. That's why they're core. So if you see them as core in everything else as well, then you've got that ability to continue that teaching. But again, it comes down to that well-planned, sequenced curriculum.
One good way of combining them is that I quite like is that the stuff in the writing revolution. So there's a lot of sentence level work that they advocate. But if you use the subject content of the non-core curriculum, the history topics, science topics, and then build in sentence level work, that is really good for children's articulation of their understanding and their communication of not just the subject content, but sometimes the disciplinary knowledge of a subject too. And definitely we found in the first lockdown that when children returned after that period, their writing stamina and their writing accuracy definitely suffered. And of all the core subjects, the writing was the biggest hit. So if we can combine that in this period, combine the fascination and the interest to do with non-core curriculum with the basic skills, I think that's one way of protecting children from any possible losses in this third lockdown.
So One of the advantages, if there can ever be an advantage of this lockdown, I suppose, is what you're identifying, which is reflecting back on what you learned about the fact that, writing took a hit. But we all know the challenges are also around getting the right balance, particularly when you're short of staff because they may be not able to come into school. How do you think subject leaders are coping with their subjects, given that perhaps they're being asked to do much more than they were normally, more as in diverse use of their time?
Well, I just in terms of the journey that we've been on, I think for subject leaders, it's probably the best time for them to understand what are the key skills or basic facts they want to get right in their subject area, reflect on that themselves, and then talk to the other staff and see what children are doing. And you can easily do that through Teams, or Google Classrooms, whatever you've got. You can go in and see what's happening much easier than you would have been able to see if you were having to walk around a school and pop into lessons, etc. And we know that often is a reflection of a presentation as opposed to what teaching looks like. But, we've been able to have regular meetings with our subject leads and develop their understanding of their subject. And when you start challenging that, it's quite shocking how little people know. And I tell you, on one of the first inset days we did during the lockdown, the question we asked them was, how many pages does the DT curriculum cover in the national curriculum? How many pages is it? And what is statutory and non-statutory in the history curriculum? And nobody knew, because teachers don't have the time or don't spend time looking at their national curriculum, and then they progress into subject leaders. They still haven't looked at that curriculum. And so if anything, now is the time where you're not needed to go around and make sure all plates are spinning, to go back to the basics and make sure you know what you need to know. But then schools have got to have an understanding of what they need to know. And Nick and I started some work around a leadership curriculum because of that very reason. And do schools have an idea of what they want their leaders to know, what they expect them to know? I don't know.
You made a good point there about developing their own expertise. I think I've got a rather unorthodox view of what subject leaders should do. When I started at Courthouse about a year in, we had a couple of new middle leaders taking over kind of the core subjects, and they were either relatively inexperienced teachers or new to the school, and I suppose a common thing to do would be to ask them to write action plans and then to do them. But realistically, if you don't train them properly to do action plans, then they spend hours and hours on these documents, fiddling about with them and not actually doing any subject leadership. So the way that I did it differently was said to them, you just take some time, a term or 2 terms, just to make sure that you are 100% knowledgeable and expert within your subject, because the subject leaders who don't know the entirety of the curriculum or don't know the subject specific pedagogy or the disciplinary knowledge, they can't lead others. And if teachers can figure this out really quickly. If someone is standing in front of you asking you to do something or advising you to do something, and they come across as not knowledgeable, that is terrible. They lose their credibility straight away. And so you have to protect subject leaders. You can't just give someone DT to lead in September and then say, oh, DT needs work. Can you rewrite the curriculum? Can you do some training on DT? Because they'll crumble in front of other people and it'll be terrible. I think giving people the time to develop the expertise and to remove unnecessary work like writing action plans, that can all be centrally done as a strategic leadership role, and subject leaders need to be supported to understand what they're doing and influence others before just throwing them in front of people and asking them to influence others' practice.
And once they've established themselves as being competent or learning, making sure coverage is there and making sure that it's appropriate, Do you think that because of the slightly odd, or not slightly, very odd circumstances at the moment, that coverage will be weak because you've got some children in school, presumably some children at home, you've got the challenge of IT, technology availability? I just wonder whether you're having already to be thinking about the next step, where how are we going to fill these gaps? What are we going to do to make sure that year 2 did do what they were supposed to do in science, so that year 3 can build on it, etc.?
Yeah, I think that is a massive challenge. There's a couple of things around the whole idea of building in those gaps. The issue I have with the term catch up is that children are not going to catch up, and it implies that when we come back from lockdown, there's a small amount of time, possibly a year, if we're lucky, a year and a half, where we've got to do some different style of teaching, and the children will then be where they need to be. And if you look at it like that, you're not really going to deal with the issue well enough. They're not going to catch up. What they're going to need is a really, really good assessment in place, so that teachers know where they are struggling, where they are weaker, what needs to happen. And I think that's where the autonomy comes in, because if you've got a good assessment in place, and you're using it incredibly well, and that's what STAR tests enable you to do, because it's adaptive and you can look at it, it's there, you're getting live information all the time, you're responding to the needs of the children, you've got that ability to embed some of the things that they really need to secure, and you've got the time to do it, because some of them will have got it, others won't, and it won't just be those lower achievers, it will be children who have also quite able, but they've missed that learning. So you've got a nice mix there, and if you see that as an opportunity to be more focused in terms of your assessment for learning, I think you can slowly start plugging those gaps. In terms of your sort of disciplinary knowledge around history, science, etc., that I think is more difficult, because if you take something like the Tudors, there's so much there to explore, and there's so much great subject knowledge that already without the lockdown you haven't got enough time to cover it. So how do you do that? I don't know. Maybe this is a conversation where secondary schools need to be a bit more involved, and secondary schools as not just the history department but the English department buying into that as well, possibly a way forward. But yeah, I think the disciplinary knowledge is going to be difficult.
I agree. I think leaders need to understand that. I think it's from a while ago some research about three levels of the curriculum, which Ofsted has picked up on and used for their intent, implementation, impact. But at the first level, there's the intended curriculum, what we want children to learn, basically the national curriculum with some additional context for our own schools. But we have to understand that not all of the intended curriculum gets taught because of time or teacher expertise or even the resources to do so. And then even, I mean, if less than the intended curriculum is being actually taught, even less is being fully learned. And we kid ourselves, I think, sometimes about how much children learn. I mean, Key Stage 2 SATs, you've got to get, 55 marks out of 110 to get a pass, which isn't, and that's, which isn't, if you just look at it coldly, that's not a challenging pass mark. If we just if we take the time to kind of understand and accept that, then we go back to what Navroop said earlier about checking what it is that children need to learn, the prerequisites. So if we come back after lockdown and we continue with our planned curriculum, all teachers need to do is understand what they should, the prior knowledge that they should have, and assess to the extent to which they know those prerequisites, address those gaps, and then move on with the planned curriculum. One of my bugbears is a lot of the talk about the recovery curriculum. I don't think you need a recovery curriculum if you have a well-sequenced curriculum in the first place, and you have teachers who understand prerequisites, what they are and how to address them, so they can move on with the rest of it.
So have you actually done, you mentioned STAR, are you planning to do remote STAR testing, or are you thinking, actually, I don't feel secure that that's going to be valid or done with fidelity?
I haven't made my mind up about it, to be totally honest. I don't know which way to go with it. We have been using the MyOn reading at home. And so fortunately, we've got a lot of children who are still accessing the right level of books. They're reading with the teachers, are reading with parents. And in fact, reading is probably improving because parents just want the children to start reading and it keeps them busy for a while. So children have got opportunity to read a lot more. We've sent out podcasts and things like that. So we'd continue with that, which makes me think, perhaps we should do the tests, because right now I feel like it's the only reliable data we've got. We've ignored all the other assessments we've done because they're redundant. One class was not here and teachers weren't here, and there's no point trying to play catch up with that. But in terms of the accelerated reader, really good data coming out, it's still accurate. And so the STAR tests, it'll be interesting to see what they throw up. So probably we would do it, but I could easily be convinced not to. I'm not sure about it at the minute.
We're doing the same thing. The MyOn is brilliant, accelerated reader is brilliant, and we can do a lot worse in this lockdown than just encourage more and more reading. We had quite a pleasing result after the second lockdown. There was one year group, I think year 5, where we compared their average standardized score just before schools locked down with the average standardized score in October, and it actually was higher. The current had a higher average standardized score in reading despite that lockdown period. And I think that's where standardized scores are useful. It's really hard to find an assessment system that actually assesses your curriculum, which is one of the difficulties in choosing a suite. But this is the reason why I think both Navroop and I have gone with STAR, because it's adaptive and it tailors responses to how well children are doing. You're never going to get absolute 100% assessment of your own curriculum with reading maths, unless you design your own standardized test score, which none of us have the capability or the time to do. I think STAR is definitely the best bet in that. Having said, I don't think we're going to get them to do that at home. We'll definitely wait until children come back to school to check on general progress over time.
It's interesting because we've had several lots of conversations with schools, and we have now given out some guidance because we were aware, to Navroop's point, shall we, shan't we? What will happen if we do, and what will happen if we don't? And so there is some support for that. And obviously, it's the whole fidelity issue, but sometimes having a benchmark or a sort of starting place, or to just, what is actually going on? It wouldn't be the end of the world. It might be an outlier, but actually it gives you some sort of indication. Do you think that teachers who are responsible for, so presumably you have an assessment lead, do you have somebody who is responsible for assessment in the school, both of you?
Yes.
So what is their sort of pinch point, or what do you think is their challenge at the moment in terms of ensuring that they are getting the right message over to their colleagues and doing the best for them?
I think that knowledge of assessment is vital for the whole senior leadership team. Like the idea about what information assessments give you. So you've got a lot of schools do standardized tests, and obviously there are benefits to that, so with comparisons to national cohorts. So I think it's important that all senior leaders have a really good knowledge of assessment, because there are benefits to having a standardized testing suite, because it gives you an opportunity to look at trends over time, and it's something that many governing bodies want to see as indicators of progress over time and how attainment might look. But I think the standardized test scores only give you so much, because they're not related to your own curriculum. And so assessment leads also need to have that knowledge of what is actually on the curriculum, what are the key concepts, the key ideas that children should learn and know and understand and remember, and that assessment systems need to be built around the extent to which children understand that. So we use Microsoft Forms to create quizzes for each unit of work in the non-core subjects as well. And those quizzes, they're designed to assess the substantive knowledge that children should have learned in that unit of work, and they're designed to assess the disciplinary knowledge of that children have gained in that unit of work, as well as any key concepts. And what we do is we make those available to all children across the school on our website.
I think the quizzes, the brain dumps and all these kind of things that are available to teachers give you far more information about what the children have retained and the areas that they still need to work on. And the funny thing is we use insights tracking, and it is the objectives for the national curriculum. And the difference between how early years can remember and learn what they need to teach their children compared to the rest of the school is quite big, because early years live and breathe those objectives. They know them off by heart. If I go down there now, they'll be able to tell me exactly which child is learning what their next step is. They've engaged in that all the time, whereas in the rest of the school, from 1 to 6, there's been a big reliance on these end of year tests, and so therefore we've got to track how close they are every term to get into the test, and they really don't mean very much, because as Nick said, they're not matching your curriculum, and so you're taking a standardized test in the middle of the year when you haven't covered it all, so clearly you're not going to be there. Hopefully some of them will have carried on making the progress in terms of what that test is covering, and so the over reliance on termly test and on those key stage 2 tests is too much, but I get it, because governors want to see these figures and numbers and local authority want to see them. They're not so interested in understanding the pitfalls of these standardized score tests or scale scores or anything like that. They just know that a number that's going up is a good indicator that the school is doing well. It's not necessarily the case, and you're testing what children can remember in a given time, in a given situation, and then every test is done in a different situation. You know, the room might be different, the time, or whatever it is. So these are all just best fit measures. They're not accurately showing what children learn. Teacher assessment, however, does, but you can't get that right unless you know the curriculum and understand the concept that they're not going to remember everything you've taught them. They're going to remember a tiny amount of it. So what is key and what's important?
And so what you've just said, Navroop, it really sort of builds in quite nicely to the whole SATs discussion. And, you know, maybe Nick, you'd like to pick up on that in terms of we're not doing SATs, or you're not doing SATs. What can you say in response to that? How does that affect life?
I understand why schools place a lot of emphasis on them, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of accountability on heads to maintain good results. But I think there's a paradox in that if you chase good SATs results, the rest of the curriculum and even the kind of children's well-being and life chances are risked for those greater numbers. So I know that it's possible to get children who might struggle with academic work to pass SATs, but at the expense of wider understanding. I think schools and governing bodies need to be brave enough to commit to a broad and balanced curriculum. And if you get that right, SATs results will follow. And I think that the bravery of governing bodies and academy trusts need to back the curriculum strategies and curriculum development. It's a long-term process, and SATs are an indicator. And again, if you're getting curriculum development and curriculum leadership right, then SATs will take care of themselves.
Yeah, I was going to say on that, when I took over at Wexham, there was a lot of issues within the school, particularly around the attainment of pupils. It was very, very low, and we walked straight into an Ofsted in that year. And you know, it was a really difficult time. School went into RI on achievement, but was good on the other areas. And so we were left with this grade that none of us felt we should have had. But the pressures externally that were put upon the school to get those numbers up were immense. I think that slightly changed, but I knew I was doing the wrong thing at that time. But I'm a brand new head, and I'm trying to, bring the school along with me. And all the people wanted to know was, this term, what's your test scores? What are they this term? What are they this term? That takes away from your confidence in terms of being able to turn around and say, no, I don't. That's not the important thing. The important thing is this curriculum, and I've got to get that right. So yeah, schools are in under pressure over lots of different things, and so it's easy to fall into that SATs trap, which is why right now, with them gone, which is great relief, because it does highlight how much they are about the school and not the child. Schools have got a bit of freedom, haven't they, to explore other things, and they should really take that opportunity. Schools that are sort of sitting back and not doing anything, there might be a widening of a gap there, and that's a gap that I think people need to be concerned about. But yeah,
I think it's a perfect opportunity to redesign school accountability across the board. No SATs last year, no SATs this year. It's a perfect opportunity for the DfE to rethink the whole structure, because it can be restrictive, and really, I mean, SATs results, a huge influence on how children achieve is where you are in the world, what postcode you're in. Some schools get great results despite not having well-designed curricula, despite not investing in professional development for research-informed pedagogy, whereas other schools in disadvantaged areas have to work so much harder to get results that are deemed acceptable. It's definitely a time to rethink the whole thing.
It's interesting as well, because I don't know the answer to this, but I just wonder where in the past what we do is we get a grade, we get a number of percentage, and we pass that to secondary schools, and they have another set of tests that they do most probably, and they get their percentage baseline and where they're going to work on. Whereas I think last year, over the summer, the teachers in year 6 talking to the year 7 teachers, the dialogue was a lot more focused on curriculum. And I think for secondary schools, I imagine their goal was more about what is it we actually need to teach, where have they got to, as opposed to let's quickly baseline them and start with a figure. So, that opportunity for schools to work cross-phrase is there. And schools have not fallen apart without those SATs results. No. They're still continuing. Our phonics screen check didn't take place last year, but we still put the work in there, and the children have done well. Schools will not give up on their children just because you take a test away.
No,
and
absolutely.
If you reduce children's understanding of the curriculum to a SATs test score, or even like internal attainment data, test scores, you lose all the complexity of what children know and don't know, understand and don't understand. I think that there does need to be a shift away from numbered and even graded measures of what children know. That, I mean, when levels were scrapped those few years ago, just got replaced with working towards expected and greater depth, but that doesn't mean anything. It's so vague that it reduces the complexity of your curriculum and actually stops teachers and leaders from thinking about what it is that children should learn, and if they haven't learned it, what they should do about it.
Something that's just occurred to me, of course, is that you're a junior school, Nick, and Navroop, obviously, a primary school. Do you think you're disadvantaged, Nick, by receiving children at year 3 where you don't know them, you haven't had the same relationship and the same influence on their learning? Or do you just accept that sort of is and you get used to that sort of approach, whereas Navroop's obviously getting them from 4 and 5 and building them through?
Yeah, there is a phenomenon of the junior school dip, but I mean, we're no more disadvantaged than secondary schools are. when they get children in from year 7, and we often have conversations about this, that that we need to find out what they're doing in the feeder schools, but actually, if it doesn't matter what happened in the feeder schools, and this is my opinion for secondaries thinking about collecting children from various primary feeders, is that if you've got your curriculum designed in a certain way, if you've got your routines and your culture, then children will adapt to that. So an example we do with our maths curriculum is that in year 3, we've taken out huge chunks of what the national curriculum suggests might go into year 3 and put it into year 4. So actually in year 3, we spend a lot more time on the basics in order to get them to automaticity, to get them to understand, rather than moving through the curriculum quickly. And although that means more content in year 4, and then some year 4 content to year 5, and some year 5 content to year 6, although that is the case, what we're hoping is that over time, because the children will be so more fluent in the basics, that there's less time needed on those things later on. So that's a deliberate decision we made for maths to try and combat that junior school dip. But I think it's too easy to say, oh, they came up not knowing X, Y, and Z. But it's our responsibility to make sure they fill those gaps. It comes down to knowing prerequisites and having a well-designed curriculum and making sure that children are working as hard as they can.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because we get a third of our children that come to nursery don't come from, go to reception, don't come from our nursery. And there is a difference between those and the ones that were in our nursery school to begin with. But like Nick says, you know that, so you have to adapt your curriculum to put something in place. Our need is speech and language, and we have a really strong language program for those children when they come in, and therefore you enable them to be able to have the basic skills to learn whatever else is coming. So yeah, it's a really positive way of looking at it.
So it's been absolutely fascinating, and I love the way that you've been able to sort of dovetail in and bounce from each other, and you're obviously coming from a similar position and have a strong understanding of leadership and the way in which you want your children to develop. Just to be a little bit devil's advocate, and we've pretty much come to the end, we know that the future is not entirely clear as to whether you're going to continue in this enforced lockdown, and you're not closed. I'm not going to say your school's closed, because no school is closed. What would, if I was to hand you the baton, Navroop, to say it's your decision, and you obviously have got safety there as well, what would you do for the rest of the academic year if you could do what you thought was the best thing?
In terms of whether I would bring the school back, children.
Yes.
It's really interesting. I had governors last night and the same question came up. And in January, prior to opening, to schools coming back, I did actually make the decision that the school would close. And that was after a lot of conversations with my peers locally. And the data that was suggesting that Slough rate of infection was increasing quite a lot. We'd had loads of emails from parents to say that they were really concerned. I know that teachers were concerned. And actually, you've got to do the right thing at that point. Education is really important, but life is more important. And I think sometimes as educationists, we get that wrong. We get caught up on if you haven't got this education in life, you're going to fail and you're not going to get to where you want to get. And that's just not true. There's lots of different ways to get to where you need to get to. And when we made the decision to keep the schools shut, the parents all wrote back and said, thank you for putting our children first. And that's, I hadn't really appreciated that as a head, that's what they need right now. They need to know that I have got their children's best interests at heart, and my teachers need to know that I will not put them in a situation which will endanger them. And so again, if it's not safe, we won't open, because I think we've moved forward in our remote learning in such a positive way that for the children that are engaging, and we monitor engagement daily, I think they've got a good diet. Not as good as if you were in school, but we will as educationalists get together and work out how we need to proceed with our curriculum because we are aware of persistent problems, and some of these are similar to the ones that we always have, and there's new ones that we'll deal with. So I will do what is right for this local area, and that would always be the right thing to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with all of that. I think what we've seen in the last few weeks in this lockdown is teachers going above and beyond, working probably longer hours than they normally would to get to grips with a new way of working. And I'm 100% confident that our remote learning offer, remote teaching offer, is better in so many ways. We've learned so much since the previous lockdown. There's better explanations, there's better feedback, there's clearer tasks, there's more social interaction, there's more community events. And although, as Navroop said, it's not as good as being in school, it's 100% the right thing to do to put our focus and our efforts into making remote teaching as effective as possible, so that people can stay at home until it's safe to return to some sort of normality.
Just on the remote learning as well, as a sort of final point, I would keep so many elements of the things that we've been doing through remote learning in school, regardless of what happens in the future. So our digital platform is really strong, and the way the teachers are reacting to children is great. I wouldn't change a lot of that. We would keep it alongside our normal school day. So what have I learned through this lockdown? Loads. I've learned so much about myself, my school, and actually the fact that we have got another way of teaching. You know, we talk about the whole Victorian style, teacher in front of a class. That's not changed in years. And right now we're at that point where we can change it. So yeah, I would. And I would continue to research other ways of teaching. And, you know, teachers don't have to be one teacher in front of a class. Group work and responding to individual needs, you've got a platform to do that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of positives to draw from it.
Thank you. Thank you both very much for your time and your passion and your enthusiasm and your knowledge. And maybe we'll invite you back at the end of the school year or the beginning of next and reflect back on some of this conversation and see how things have changed or not, or developed. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for listening to the 4th episode of the COVID School Miniseries, The Headteachers, brought to you by the Renaissance Podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please do share it with a comment on your social media account, whether it's Twitter or Facebook. My own handle and Margaret's handle will be in the bio of this episode, so please do tag us in any posts you may have about the episode. And please do leave a comment and share the episode, like the episode, subscribe to the SoundCloud account. All that will help us to continue creating podcast episodes and bringing in more fascinating guests to discuss education and how the education specifically within the UK has dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges around remote learning. And if you'd like to listen to previous episodes of the COVID School mini-series, then please do go ahead and find them on the same SoundCloud account under the playlist COVID School mini-series. In episode number 3, Margaret chats to researcher Dr. Sarah McGowan, who is the author of the wonderful Guide to Reading Enjoyment. So do listen to that one. It's a brilliant conversation with Dr. Sarah McGowan. It's a fascinating insight into the reading trends and reading habits of children. That's all from us now. Stay tuned and do follow us, myself and Margaret, on social media, and subscribe to the SoundCloud account for updates on the next episode. Stay safe.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Renaissance Space podcast, please check out the Education Joining the Dots podcast from our colleagues at GL Assessment. Thank you.